And good afternoon and welcome to UK Column Live from Plymouth, England. And the focus of our show today is going to be on matters concerning the banks and the economy. And of course we're beginning to see some amazing things unfold in the City of London. The truth is finally beginning to come up to the surface about the corruption in the British banking system. And we're now finally starting to see the Bank of England's involvement with this mess. That is also starting to come to the fore. We've got the Treasury Select Committee underway, and I believe that as we speak, Marcus Agius, the chairman of Barclays, is actually being grilled before that committee. This, of course, is an interesting situation because apart from anything else, this is the very man who has been advising the BBC on what their policy should be and paid the handsome sum of £47,000 for a mere 28 days' work. So for those of you that are still watching the BBC, you might care to consider how the BBC is maintaining unbiased reporting on the subject of Barclays banks when they are taking advice from the very organisation. Now, without more ado, I'd like to ask Mike a key question of Mike, what is happening with the banks and the economic system at the moment? What can you tell us about what's going on?
Well, I think to answer that, we need to start a few weeks ago with the business over the NatWest Bank, RBS, the so-called computer failure.
Yep.
And that affected Royal Bank of Scotland, NatWest and Ulster Bank. There was some speculation at the time that perhaps it wasn't what it seemed. For example, the official story was that a software deployment was made to upgrade some software, and that went wrong. Somebody pressed the wrong button, and it deleted all the transactions in the transaction queue. RBS claimed that it then took them another week and a half to recover the transactions in that queue.
Right.
Now, you know, I worked in the city, at least in the financial industry. I know I was working for a technology-driven company. So software deployments were something that happened on a regular basis. And yes, occasionally they go wrong. In fact, they go wrong quite a lot.
Yeah.
But you never don't do a risk assessment and consider the backout plan if anything goes wrong. Yeah. And you've got to consider every eventuality, because at the end of the day, if something goes wrong and you find yourself unable to do your normal business, you're losing lots of money very quickly. And so it just is staggering to me that NatWest found themselves in that situation. Now, it is a fact that they sacked a lot of their experienced IT guys at the start of the year, and tried to outsource a lot of their IT work to India and other places. And it may be that it's a consequence simply of the bankruptcy of the bank in general, that it wasn't able to afford to maintain proper staff. Yeah. But I have a suspicion, and I've no proof for this, but just looking at the general situation around RBS, I have a suspicion that there was more to that story than met the eye, that actually RBS, NatWest and Ulster Bank were in a significantly dangerous situation with regard to their liquidity. Right. And that actually the computers may well have been switched off in order to cope with that. Right.
Have I got this right? The effect for ordinary people out in the streets was that they were seeing that cash machines weren't working. Is this part of the same thing you're describing?
Effectively, the money flows into and out of the bank were immediately stopped, and couldn't be restarted again until all the historical transactions from the point of the software upgrade failure were run through, and that took a long time, and you've got to ask why. And in fact, in the case of Ulster Bank, it's still not resolved, and they don't expect it to be resolved until the 16th of July.
Right, but we're getting a real hit here against people, ordinary people. I know several people who went to cash machines, and for the first time in their life, they experienced that machine wouldn't give them money. And from the comments they've made to me, they were utterly shocked. Obviously, they've never had a problem of being overdrawn and the bank stopping it. This was people who live very ordered, confident lives, going to the machine, trying to get money out, and there is no money.
Well, no, cash machines do break from time to time. Yeah. They run out of money from time to time. But you know that you can always go to the next cash machine and get your money out. And in this case, of course, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So there's a very big question mark over exactly what happened with RBS and NatWest and Ulster Bank. And the question is, were they coming extremely close to going to the wall for a second time?
Yeah.
And was this so-called computer glitch the excuse that was needed to stop transactions and give the bank a chance to sort out its solvency issue, right? So that problem rolled on for a week and a half or so, and then the next thing that happened was we got this massive news about the LIBOR fixing from Barclays.
Right. Can you just explain? People have probably heard of the word LIBOR. Can you explain in simple terms what it is?
Well, LIBOR is a brand name which is owned by the British Banking Association.
Right.
And it means it refers to interest rates which are used for interbank lending. But as well as interbank lending, there's also a lot of derivatives activity goes on based on the LIBOR rate.
Right. So LIBOR is something that affects the high street banks, the banks that ordinary, all of us ordinary people are going in and using. Is it?
It affects a lot of things, but yes, it is the interest rate that banks lend to each other at, and so it has an effect on your mortgage, but it's also being used for speculation.
Right.
In derivatives markets, and I won't go into detail about because we don't have time, but a lot of the stress was put on the interbank lending rate and sort of the retail effect of that. They were suggesting that this LIBOR fixing was in order to make Barclays appear more liquid, more solvent, and therefore be able to borrow money cheaper.
Right.
But actually, there's much more to that because, as I say, there's derivative speculation going on linked to that LIBOR rate as well. So there's a much larger issue there than just the issue of mortgage rates and whatnot. So that was actually a pretty dirty.
Yeah. So what you're saying is, although LIBOR is there affecting day-to-day type stuff like mortgages, dependent upon it was the really big money in the derivative market.
Yes, casino gambling going on with it as well, and so the mainstream media focused on the retail side of things.
Yeah.
Now it has to be said that Barclays is not the only bank that was doing this. There are lots of other banks being investigated. So the timing of the announcement of the fines for Barclays from the States and for the UK, just coming immediately after, just in time to direct people's attention away from the RBS NatWest thing, seems to be convenient timing, considering there are these other investigations going on at the same time. There was no requirement to single Barclays out at this point.
Right.
There are 20 other banks or so that are also being investigated. So why not wait until that investigation was complete? There was some reason I think that they announced that at that time.
Right. So you would say, I think the figure was 284 million or something like that was the fine, which of course to most people when they see that in a paper, this is a lot of money. That's a very severe fine. But I would guess as a percentage of the total bank's turnover, 284 million is a tiny fine for a...
Well, never mind the bank's turnover. There was never any announcement about how much profit was made as a result of the LIBOR fixing.
Right.
So what percentage of that profit was the fine? And if it was only 10% of the profit that they made out of the fine, then that's worth paying, isn't it?
Out of the fixing, 10%. Yeah. So we have still not been told at the moment in mainstream media what the actual financial damage has been to ordinary people, ordinary companies as a result of the fixing.
The fact of the matter is that this LIBOR fixing was known about and understood in the City of London for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not new news in that sense. It's new news to the public, but those working within the city have known about it for a long time.
Yeah.
So the question is, how close did RBS and NatWest come to failure again? Was this Barclays scandal there to direct people's attention away while they try to solve that? And then the sort of next major policy shift, it seems to have come from certainly a faction within the City of London, but it's coming from the Financial Times is talking about it, The Economist is talking about it. Lord Miners was the first that I saw really pushing this policy of Glass-Steagall, which we've been talking about for years. Right. And Miners was on Channel 4 News talking about. I'll explain what.
Explain it. Yeah, just
Miners was on Channel 4 News. What was it? Some Wednesday, Thursday last week, and I was really surprised because he works on the board of one of Jacob Rothschild's companies. Right. And so he sits beside him around the table with Jacob Rothschild himself. The whole Inter-Alpha Group banking cartel was established by Rothschild. So this European banking cartel, which is utterly bankrupt at the moment, is his brainchild, if you like. Right. And so if Miners is saying this, then I cannot believe that he's saying he's going against his colleague's policy. Yeah. So last week suddenly there's been this policy shift towards a Glass-Steagall policy. Now, what is Glass-Steagall? It was legislation that was brought in the United States after the great crash of the 1930s, where basically the idea was to separate the speculative investment merchant banking from the retail banking, on the basis that if speculators do things which get themselves into trouble, there shouldn't be any reason why that should cause a problem for the retail banking sector, and it shouldn't affect small businesses really. And up until now, we've certainly been talking about this since 2006, 2007, before the crash, and we've been saying, look, there's going to be a financial crash. The reason that there's going to be a financial crash is because the banks are too big to fail, and that there's too much bogus speculation going on in the derivatives markets. There's debt upon debt upon debt upon debt. It can't go on forever. It's going to collapse at some point. It needs to be dealt with now before it happens. Right. And of course they didn't deal with it when we suggested that they should have dealt with it. Right. They kept the bubble going and going, and then once the crash hit in 2007, 2008. The City of London was absolutely vehemently against any kind of separation of the banks, and so the government set up the Vickers committee to look at what needed to be done, and they came up with this ring fencing idea. Right. And the ring fencing idea is, let's say you have a company like Barclays, which has a retail section and it has an investment banking section. Then you create a firewall between those, and theoretically those two areas of operation should never interact. Right. But of course, that doesn't mean that if the company as a whole gets into difficulties, that the retail end won't be affected by it. And the analogy that I used whenever they announced this ring fencing idea in the first place, it was like the Titanic. The Titanic had the separation between the compartments in the hull, but the separation didn't go right up to the bulkhead. So the water was able to spill over the top, and this is exactly what the ring fencing idea does. Now, it turns out that the LIBOR scandal would not have been protected by, it still would have happened in this ring fencing scenario. So the only way to protect the retail banking sector from the speculation is to have completely separate companies. So that if Barclays Retail, for example, is providing us with checkbooks and personal loans and business loans, and savings accounts and whatnot, that's over here. It's a completely separate company. If the Barclays Investment Bank goes out of business, it doesn't affect this company at all, and actually there's no obligation then on the taxpayer to look after this company. You know, it's only the fact that of the too big to fail idea, and the fact that it's that the investment banks have had such an impact on the real economy that the pressure's been on us to that ordinary people would have, you know, accepted the idea of bailing out this gambling. You know.
So just one point, because I think there'll be quite a few listeners and viewers who are going to be saying, well, if we've got Mr. Rothschild or we've got people close to Rothschild who are actually starting to say that this Glass-Steagall is a good idea, many people at the moment would say, well, the whole mess has been created by the sheer scale and power of the Rothschild banking empire. Why would Mr. Rothschild's team be interested in a sensible measure to start to take control of the banks?
Right, okay, so one thing that we more or less understand is that the whole banking collapse has been engineered for political reasons. You know, these people aren't stupid. They know what they're doing. They know what the effects of debt upon debt upon debt are, and they understand the ultimate effect of their policy. And remember that we're talking about policy here. So yeah, you've got all these thousands of people in the City of London that are effectively running amok and speculating with other people's money, but they're only able to do that because of the policy that's in place that permits them to do that, right? So the banking regulation policy and the rules and regulations within individual banks. So it's clear that that the banking collapse is artificial in a sense, because everybody, they all say they couldn't see it coming, but that is,
well, we know that's not true, because people were telling us 4 or 5 years ago.
Right. So so there were the political aims to be got out of the banking collapse, but of course, if they allow the banking system to collapse utterly, then that's their power base gone. Right. So they're quite happy to have these major events happen over the last 3 or 4 years, which cause all kinds of pain for people on the streets, and that creates the problem, which then causes the reaction. You know, we're into this problem reaction solution thing. That creates the problem, which causes the reaction, and the solution then might be full European fiscal union, or it might be full European political union. These are the kind of aims that they've got, right? But ultimately, they can't allow the banking system to collapse completely, because that's the basis of their power. Right. So I believe that what has actually happened here is that NatWest, RBS NatWest Ulster Bank, has come this close to going to the wall again. That's indicative of the system absolutely coming to the cliff edge. They realise that the system is now absolutely at the cliff edge, that they can't play it anymore. They've run out of time, and they've got to do something to save it in some way, in some form.
And if this appears successful to if this appears to be a sensible solution to ordinary people, we are being caught up in the trap again, because people are going to go for it.
Exactly, and we've got to remember. Well, I mean, it has to happen, but and we'll come on to that in a second. But people have to remember that these people don't think in short-term terms of they're not short-termist in their attitudes. They don't particularly, I mean, it's maybe disappointing to them, but they don't particularly care that, you know, the last time the Glass-Steagall came in, which was in the United States in the 1930s, it took them until 1998 to get rid of it again. it's not that big a deal for them to go for, if they have to do it again, they might it might be disappointing that they haven't met a target or whatever their targets are. But I don't think they're going to, at the end of the day, they've got to save what they've got. Now, of course, Glass-Steagall is only part of the picture, because if they now implement Glass-Steagall and that saves their system, and that's their financial system that they saved. In the meantime, we have a real economy to save, a real physical economy, which means, and that's something which our so-called elected representatives are not addressing in any way, shape or form. And, we had news a couple of days ago that the M4 is closed at Heathrow because of some major structural issue with the road. We've got, you and I, as I said in closing yesterday, you and I drive around the country a lot. It's absolutely clear that Spaghetti Junction is crumbling right in front of your eyes. At the start of this year, we had a drought, which was mostly caused by the fact that the water pipes are leaking so much.
And reservoirs have been shut down.
And right across the country, we have infrastructure which is crumbling. And we have another example. Apparently, in 2013 or 2015, can't remember. I think it's 2013. We're going to have to start switching off coal and oil-fired power stations because we haven't designed and implemented a carbon capture and storage solution for them yet. And we don't actually have any infrastructure building program in place to replace that power generating capacity. So we've got all these people unemployed at the moment. We've got a collapsing infrastructure, and we've got a collapsing economy, and all the focus is on saving the financial system. And really, the focus needs to be redirected back onto saving the real economy and rebuilding it again.
Okay, now a lot of people, of course, will be watching the programme, and they're saying, well, but how can you do that? Because there's no money.
Okay, well, this comes back to the question of where money comes from, and we're not going to go into that in any great detail because we've only got 8 minutes left. But this principle of national credit, this greenback pound idea, it brings us back to the question of how rational is it for a sovereign nation state to borrow its sovereign currency from private investors? Would it not be more sensible for that sovereign nation state to create its own money out of nothing, as the banks do at the moment, and actually spend it into the economy on infrastructure, and use the infrastructure development as a driver for the rest of the economy, and so you do it on the basis of the highest technology you have available, and you before the skills in order to rebuild our infrastructure die out, because the people that are capable of doing this are all at the dying stage of,
and we haven't been using apprentices for years and years,
this country has demonstrated on a number of occasions that it can mobilize for a war. It can mobilize the entire nation for a war. There's no reason at this point that we could not mobilize the entire nation to rebuild our economy, and with the same kind of mobilization strategy that we might have had at the beginning of the Second World War. We get everybody working on it, start massive apprenticeship schemes.
And this is funded because the government, our government, is printing its own money as required instead of borrowing it from Mr. Rothschild or whoever else.
Well, exactly, and of course the natural response from people is, well, surely that causes inflation. But it depends how you spend it. I mean, to give an example, if you want to build a power station, and you, I don't know how much a power station costs, but let's say it costs a couple of billion. So you create that money, and let's say at present, with your present infrastructure, it costs 10p a unit to create your electricity. With your new high-tech power station, it maybe only costs 6 or 7p a unit to create to generate the same electricity. Suddenly, you actually have a reduced input cost to manufacturers, and it has it has
kickstart effect. It's a knock-on effect.
It opposes the any possibility of an inflationary. That's one of the issues, and so on. So it's not as simple as that to say that there's an inflationary pressure by creating new money. It depends how the money gets spent, and it depends how it is actually entered into the economy.
Yeah, and of course this is a question, this fundamental question about where our money comes from, where it should come from, has been asked. A number of MPs have been asked this question, and they simply refuse to deal with the question. We've actually had some very good letters forwarded in from us to us that people have sent to their MPs, and I think this is a very good subject to get into the next edition of the UK column, so that we can show that where people are asking very good, very simple questions about what's happening with our money supply, we've got the very interesting situation that MPs don't want to respond. Now, is this sheer ignorance? I think that's true for a lot of them, but also for I'm going to say an increasing number, it seems to be that there is a deliberate wall goes up. They don't want to talk about this issue of why we are just accepting all of this economic chaos from the banks. So maybe we can dig in that a bit further. I wonder whether we've got, 4 minutes left. Do you want to comment at all on Mr. Paul Tucker from the Bank of England appearing in front of the committee?
Yeah. I haven't seen exactly what he said, but the general gist of it, as I understand it, is he's saying, well, we didn't know that Barclays were doing this.
Yeah.
I think that's not true. I think there's certainly the information that I've been getting from people within the City of London is that this was well understood and actually couldn't have happened without the agreement of the Bank of England.
Yes.
So I don't think Paul Tucker was necessarily being 100% honest. I can't prove that because obviously I'm not party to internal conversations.
Yeah.
But certainly the information that I'm hearing from people within the city is that this could not have happened without their at least tacit agreement.
Yeah. And what about Bob Diamond? Do you have any comment on what he's starting to say? Do you think he's genuinely spilling the beans to protect himself a bit, or is this part of the scam?
There could be a bit of bitterness there as well, as but yes, I think he's going to be looking to protect his own back.
Right.
He's already announced this morning that he's abandoning his £20 million bonus, and really, I don't think I'll be interested to see how much of his golden handshake he gets. Yeah,
well, it doesn't impress me because we've already agreed to give up our 20 million bonus, so I haven't got any sympathy for him on that one. One little subject which we could just squeeze in here, because I think it fits in with the talk over the banks and the economy, is that we're seeing that the RDAs, the regional development agencies, are now being phased out. Now, this was something that the Tories crowed about, that when they got into power they were going to get rid of these regional bodies. But here we are, that they're finally being wound up, and what's actually happening under David Cameron's austerity regime is that there's huge payouts. So the figure I've got in front of me from the Daily Telegraph is saying that staff are walking out with as much as £33,000 each. But the Deputy Chief Executive of One North East, which is one of these quangos, was receiving a payout of £374,000. So for me, this shows just total hypocrisy with the Conservative administration. But moreover, what's interesting when you look in the history of the regional development agencies is that their effect on generating a benefit in the economy was very small, even though they were handling huge amounts of money. And the South East of England Regional Development Agency was handling £1.8 billion, and absolutely none of the people who were actually involved on the board were elected in any way. So we had people handling this vast amount of money and they were totally unaccountable, which is a fairly common pattern.
Well, that also applies to Paul Tucker, of course, who's, up until yesterday anyway, was in the lead with regard to the next governorship of the Bank of England.
Yeah.
Whether he's still in the lead remains to be seen, but you know, that is an appointed position with no accountability.
Yeah.
It's that Bank of England is one of the issues that needs to be dealt with, I think.
Okay. All right. Well, we hope that you've enjoyed the programme today. Mike has obviously put across a lot of information about the banks and what's happening. And if you feel that what we're broadcasting is better than what Mr. Peston is reporting on the BBC, we'd be grateful if you'd let us know. Tomorrow we're also topical because we've got a show which is going to be having a close look at what's happening in some of our police forces, with a main focus on Thames Valley Police. There are clearly things not right in the police force. If they were right, maybe the police will be arresting the criminals we're seeing in the banking system. Okay, well, we hope you'll join us again tomorrow. So that's it from all of us here at UK Column Live. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Bye.
Goodbye.